I will pay you all tomorrow. I must tell you first how I came to hear the story told. Probably you all know that last year we had a war with Afghanistan. That war was brought to an immediate and sudden end by the fact that we had a very big aeroplane called the Old Carthusian out in India at the time, which was ordered to go and bomb Kabul. This was shortly after the murder of the late Emir, in which the present Emir was supposed to have had a part. The main object of bombing the city was to alarm the mother of the present Emir, a result so sufficiently attained that immediately afterwards a message came in to the effect that the Afghans wanted peace. Between our outposts and Kabul there is a mountain some 6,000 feet high, more than 2,000 feet higher than Ben Nevis, and the men in the aeroplane had the greatest difficulty in returning. They only cleared the top of the mountain by 10 feet, and crashed on the other side, doing themselves a certain amount of damage. The pilot was a little man, about 4 feet 5 inches in height, named Harley, a well-known flying man, and with him was a fellow aviator named Villiers, who had served in France, but had retired from the Air Force and was in business in Calcutta. When the war with Afghanistan broke out, he had rejoined. Not long afterwards I was coming home to England and met Villiers on board the P&O. I did not then know that he was a flying man, but about 12 o'clock one day I was talking to him and 2 senior colonels of the Indian Army, acting as brigadiers in Mesopotamia. We were in the Red Sea at the time. The conversation turned on Gallipoli and Mesopotamia, and especially upon the behaviour of the Australian troops in both these theatres. Villiers then said that he could tell a curious story of the Australian Flying Corps. At that moment, the weather being hot, I suggested a whisky and soda, but he refused, saying, "If I take it, you will certainly not believe the story I am going to tell you." He had, he said, been quartered in France at a flying camp next door to an Australian squadron. As everybody knows, most of the pilots in France were young men of from 19 to 24 years of age, and were sometimes even younger than that. The Australian airmen were especially daring, but when they were off duty, the pilots and observers led the wildest of lives, and spent their time in gambling, drinking, and other forms of dissipation, on the principle of, "Let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die." One night a game of poker was going on among 4 young pilots belonging to the same flight, who were all due to go out the next morning. Since they were all heavily in debt, the game was carried on largely upon credit. The heaviest loser was the youngest pilot, who at the end of the evening gave IOUs for his debts, saying, "I cannot possibly pay you tonight, but I will pay you all tomorrow." Next morning, the weather was fair for flying, and the youngest pilot was due to go up first. His machine had hardly got to a height of 300 feet when it suddenly spun into a dive, in a way that was impossible unless it had been forced into it by the pilot. At least, it was not how a plane out of control would normally fall. There was a crash, and the pilot was killed on the spot. He was the young man who had said he would pay all the others on the next day. The next to go up was another of the 4 poker players. He was flying a double machine, with a seat for an observer and a dual control, but the observer's seat was empty. When he reached a height of nearly 500 feet, his machine suddenly stalled and crashed to the ground. The pilot was not killed on the spot, although he died a little later. When he was asked how the crash had happened, he replied that the boy who had already been killed was sitting behind him in the observer's seat and had jammed the controls and pulled him down.